We recognize October as Domestic Violence Month, but the fact is the problem persists 365 days a year. Last year, local law enforcement handled more than 19,000 cases, and some of them fatal.
With the support system, victims can survive abusive relationships and indeed go on to thrive. One such survivor recently shared her story with Fox 5's Alexis Fernandez. She hopes to inspire others to follow her lead to freedom.
Lisa Lopez now has a successful career in the real estate industry here in Las Vegas, but her future didn't always seem so bright. Her path far less clear.
I got married at a very early age. I was about 16 when I got married. I was just out of high school, and I married someone who joined the Navy.
The young bride soon found herself living in South Carolina. She also discovered a disturbing side of her spouse.
I very quickly found myself in a situation where he was physically abusing me within the first 3 months or so of being married.
Lisa says she saw no warning signs shortly until after moving in with her in-laws when her new husband shipped off for basic training.
I recall his parents fighting and having some physical altercations, which then later stories came out about that. We had gotten in an argument, and the brother very blatantly said, "Are you ready to beat her ass?"
Estranged from her parents, Lisa had no place to turn.
I was gone away from my home. I moved to Charleston, South Carolina, and I was born and raised in Las Vegas, so it's very far away from family and friends.
3 years into the marriage, a son entered the family. Lisa says her baby boy strengthened her resolve to stay and make things work. Besides, she tells us she had no place to turn.
Again, I just felt very lost and like I had no support system where I was. And not to mention, back in the day, domestic violence was not really looked at as a crime. I was faced many times with situations where I called the police and asked for help, and they would come arrest him, but they would let him go to his captain at the Navy base, who would then drive him back home to me. What do? I felt like I was stuck, which I think is a problem with people who are in domestic violence situations. They feel stuck, and that's one reason why I want to tell my story, because they're not stuck.
But it took a sudden revelation to give her the momentum to change her position.
I remember waking up one morning after a big fight and thinking, my mom would never want me to live like this. And because I had a child at the time, I thought, if I don't get out, my son is either going to become just like his father or hate him. And I didn't want either, so I decided I needed to make a move.
Alexis Fernandez, Fox 5 News, local Las Vegas.
It would take more than resolve for Lisa to escape her abusive situation. It took a concerned boss and a little mayor muscle for her to fully escape the cycle of violence. She'll tell us that part of the story coming up at 11.